Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock, let's go over the market, let's talk about what is happening to Tesla stock, what we can expect moving forward, and all that good stuff. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. Of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, and you want my thoughts as the market is open every single day as it's trading, well, I do have a membership section where, again, I constantly share my thoughts, post updates with my members. Definitely check it out for just $3 a month. That's all it is. Not trying to make it anything crazy expensive. Just $3 a month. Includes the Tesla tier, so like all my Tesla updates as the market is open trading every single day, options, so technical analysis, etc. $5 a month adds NVIDIA to that. $7 adds non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA to that. And over the weekend, I do chart requests with members on Discord, where members request tickers, and I look at them and give you my opinions and all that good stuff. So, anyways, jumping into it, though, Tesla, with a nice, humble 1% day today, closing at $332 per share. What does this mean moving forward? Well, there's a few things that happened today. So this is the arrow I had yesterday, right? Remember I mentioned how I want to see a pullback back down to 320 and ideally a pretty quick pullback and we move back up. This was pretty quick. I'm not gonna lie, this was a little bit quicker than I expected. So I'm not fully convinced this is it. I'm not convinced this is, we don't get one more visit to the downside. I'll go over into the smaller time frames later and tell you what to look for to potentially start thinking that can happen, right? Obviously, we have earnings tomorrow, massive question mark. I'll give you what I think is going to happen. Earnings is a question mark. Not trying to predict it, but I'll give you my thoughts. But we did get that move to the downside, right to that 9 exponential moving average, very close to the 21 EMA. I mean, they're all pretty squished together, of course, on that very sharp sell-off. And the thing that's interesting about this, I want to delete this arrow, I'm sure you get the idea by now, is the fact that it happened very, very quickly. Now, the reason I say on the daily it may have been too quick is because I want to, it's too quick in the sense that there's no real setup yet. I still want to see a setup. I want to see several candles, like maybe, 5 or so candles or, something like that. The best example I used, for instance, was Google here, or Google, for instance, here. You can see how the setup looked, right? It wasn't just 1 or 2 candles. It was several candles, nice build up, nice compression essentially being built up into an explosive move to the upside. Apple even kind of did the same thing right here. Nice compression, many candles, and it's exploding up. And Apple, I think, actually looks phenomenal. I shared this with my members like a week ago, right? Things like that, right? That's kind of what I'm looking for, if that makes sense. Even Reddit is kind of doing something similar right now, right? Still setting up, in my opinion. Shopify kind of did something like this here, kind of did something like this right here, even here. Just an example. I'm just illustrating what I'm looking for. And that's why I said it's a little too quick, right? It's a little too fast because there's no setup, there's no compression, there's no building compression, right? We had this massive move to the downside. Now we had this very nice move back up to the upside. And now I like to see, after a move like this to the upside, compression, which almost always develops into some kind of pattern, bullish flag, pennant, wedge, whatever. And that compression back into, key levels such as EMAs, supports that were resistance, now supports, which in this case is about that 320. That builds compression, that builds that next move, almost like a trampoline, and then you rocket higher. So that's kind of what I mean by it was almost a little too quick. So let's see. Obviously, we have earnings tomorrow. That's, obviously, a very major question mark. I'll give you my thoughts on that as well. But that's kind of what I see on the daily. Now, granted, all things considered, I still think the daily looks good, despite, there is still a very real possibility, which I'll go over soon on the shorter time frames, that, we get a little bit more of a retracement to the downside. Again, I'll go over in the shorter time frames. But, despite that, as pretty much my overall perspective on Tesla is pretty much this. Ideally, and this is the more bullish case, as long as Tesla pretty much holds 320 roughly, not exactly 320, around 320, could be 317, could be 322, give or take a few dollars around 320. Pretty much, let me remove this bull flag for now, which doesn't exist yet, but hopefully we will. But pretty much anywhere around this region right around here. As long as this rough area right here, again, 320, 317, 318, 321, maybe 316, around there. As long as that holds, though, as long as this region holds, especially post-earnings, and that's the only thing I really care about post-earnings, as long as bulls don't give up that region, especially post-earnings, especially if we come down there and hold, that's the best case scenario, in my opinion. Then we start building the compression. Bulls hold this range. They hold the exponential moving averages. They hold the previous resistance, now back to being hopefully support, of course, right? And we have the MACD, it's like a hair on the ground, and we have the MACD bullishly flipped, right? These are all good signs. This is what I like to see. This, to me, just smells like an opportunity getting ready to be made. That's how I look at this. So, again, to make it simple, as long as bulls pretty much hold 320, I actually think the daily chart overall, again, not the next day or two, overall, the next week, month, 2 months even, has potential. has potential for the bulls. I think the bulls have a very real shot here, to be completely honest with you, right? Because this setup to me right now looks somewhat similar, especially if we get this kind of pullback overall to this, right? Massive move up impulsively, it feels like here. Nice bull flag into the exponential moving averages and a move higher. And that's kind of what I want to see here. I kind of want to see something like this, but here. And that'll be the most perfect setup you can ask for, in my opinion, right? So let's continue monitoring it. Let's see how it develops and all that stuff. You never know, of course. Earnings is a big question mark, but that's, kind of what I'm looking at. Obviously, the main, risk, I guess you can say, from the technicals, I guess you can say, is the SMI. The SMI is, of course, well, it's at the upper end of the spectrum. So that to me even further tells me that, again, when we were at the upper end of the spectrum here, what did we do? About a week of consolidation, about a week of building up that pressure that I kept sharing, that I just kept showing in other tickers as well. Kept building up that pressure into that move higher. And that's what this can potentially mean. It doesn't mean it has to go back to the opposite end like this and constantly do this. We could easily do kind of what we did here, where we had this move, had this compression. It did retrace a little bit just for it to go higher into that expansion, essentially, right? So again, I'm pretty much looking for more or less a mimic of this. To make it as simple as possible, something similar. But again, this all hinges on Tesla pretty much holding about 320 and earnings not imploding the stock down below 320. Let's talk about if it does. What if it does? What if earnings doesn't go well? Or maybe the market doesn't like the earnings, or something, whatever reason the market just sells the stock off post earnings and we do go below 320. We start closing decently below 320, below 315, right? Those kind of levels, right? Well, that's where we started heading to the bottom end of this very, very large pennant, right? This very large pennant. And that's where we can easily see a move back down almost to $300 per share, which would still have potential to be very, very bullish, because as long as we don't break down below this pennant, we can still easily retrace and make our way back up, of course, and especially before the EMAs get bearish, right? Naturally speaking, but this would take longer. This would just drag out longer, things like that. So it would still have bullish potential. It would just take longer and it would be riskier, but it wouldn't be completely, void just yet. So again, the ideal scenario for bulls, hold 320. That's the ideal scenario. But let's see. It's a big question mark. But that's kind of my situation right now. I would love to see something like this. This is like if I had to just pick it out perfectly, something like this is what I would like to see, more or less, for the stock. So let's see how this overall plays out. Now, let's go to the smaller time frames. Now, what do we look for? What can we look for? I should go to 15 minutes for now. What can we look for to give us potentially, early signs that the stock, maybe does want to retrace one more time to 320, right? What can we look for? In my opinion, if we ever lose 327/328 again on the smaller time frames, like the 15-minute, the 1 hour, right? If we start losing and essentially getting below this range right again, that to me tells me that there's a good chance we come back down to 320. However, as long as the bulls don't pretty much lose that exact same level and they maintain above it, then there's a very real possibility that the bulls are still in full control. And the next step is to break pretty much the high of today, actually 335, very crucial level. 335 is a very, very important level to break. And if we break 335, I think that is opening up the potential to see into the 340s, like low to mid 340s, which is pretty much the upper end of this pennant, right? It'll be a test of this pennant right here. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if that was confusing or not. Hopefully, I hope it wasn't. But that's kind of my perspective on the shorter term as well. That's kind of what to look out for. And the reason I give the bulls the upper hand here overall right now is because there is a chance that we saw a very large sweep today. On the 1 hour, for like about 15 minutes or something like that, the market sold off aggressively, right? Tesla sold off aggressively. Everything sold off aggressively right here. I think it was this one here. No, it wasn't that. It was lower. It was right here. Right? Everything sold off here. I don't know what happened. I don't know. I stepped away for like 10 minutes and this happened. It was pretty unfortunate. I missed this beautiful entry I was waiting for. Hey, you step away for 10 minutes and this happens. Hey, it is what it is. But we had this massive sell-off, right? And this was a sell-off that, seemed kind of spooky at first. But what did it end up causing on the 1 hour? It ended up causing what seems to be a massive, massive liquidity sweep for Tesla, because Tesla recovered actually quite well, right? And that's what I look at this, because, a lot of people had stops below these levels. I promise you that right now. This is why sometimes you see these very large sell-offs very aggressively, because it waterfalls the stop losses. Someone had a stop here, it triggered, the shares automatically sold. Then someone had a stop just below that, just below that, just below that. And it kind of waterfalls and waterfalls and waterfalls and waterfalls, right? And that's sometimes why you see those selling when it really starts. It gets very aggressive, very quick, very fast, because people are getting margin called, you're getting stopped out, whatever. And it's like a chain event. It just change and change and change until it obviously ends at some point. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because it recovered very quickly. And this seems like, to me, a very large liquidity sweep. Now, this to me is a liquidity sweep only if we continue holding 328, which is another reason why, in my opinion, 328 is important, or else we revisit back to 320s. But as long as bulls hold 328, which is pretty much the recovery area of the spot right here, you can see this to me was a very large liquidity sweep. And usually when you see a liquidity sweep, the stock will sooner than later, most likely, move in the opposite direction, usually sometimes pretty damn quickly. Now, of course, with earnings literally tomorrow, it does put a wrench in pretty much any technical analysis, right? So you have to understand, technical analysis, it doesn't predict earnings. You cannot predict earnings. Earnings is always a big question mark. It's impossible to predict it. If anyone tells you they can predict earnings, I promise you, they are full of shit. They're lying. That's just not how it works. You cannot predict earnings. You cannot predict how the stock is going to move. I've seen stocks that sold off aggressively, and then they sold off even more after that post earnings, and the opposite of that. There's so many variations. It's impossible to predict. But that's kind of, it's worth mentioning, despite the earnings being a massive, of course, question mark heading into tomorrow. But that's kind of the main thing that I'm eyeballing right now. Overall, again, to put it as simple as possible, as long as the bulls continue holding above 320, in my ideal case, especially post earnings, even if we get a sell off back to 320, as long as they just hold that area, I think it's looking actually quite solid. I would love to see a beautiful setup, like that kind of bull flaggy type setup, pennant, whatever, wedge, doesn't matter, something like that, into those exponential moving averages a bit more. And my guess, if I had to guess, the keyword is guess. This is just an educated guess. There's nothing substantiated behind this. This is just me guessing. What happens post earnings? I think, I'm not playing it, I'm not betting on it, and I'm not going like YOLO calls or puts, but what I think is going to happen is an IV crush, an implied volatility crush. Because, well, if you're not aware how options work, the simplest way to explain it is, well, whenever there's massive events, usually earnings, but sometimes other events as well, maybe like a massive conference or a massive unveiling potentially coming, whatever. The implied volatility of contracts, puts and calls, as a buyer, is increased. In other words, the market is expecting a larger range of movement. Because let's say usually the market is expecting Tesla for the week to move, I don't know, let's say $15 up or down from its current price, as an example. That'll be an implied volatility, just as an example. I'm just throwing out random numbers. Let's say 50%. Tesla's usually around 50%, give or take, maybe sometimes closer to 60, but usually around 50. Now that earnings is here, what does that mean? Well, we can potentially have a larger range of movement. So instead of up or down $15, now it could be up or down $30, maybe $35, right? What does the market do? It has to now account essentially for the possibilities or the probabilities for the stock to potentially go that high or that low. It takes that into account, which in this case, because the range is higher, it increases the implied volatility because now the volatility range is much larger, which in turn also increases the cost of contracts. So in other words, if Tesla's earnings comes out and it doesn't move as much as the market is currently predicting, which I believe it's about 6 to 7%. If we can actually check. You can check on these kind of websites right here. It's not loading properly though. I don't know why it's not loading. Here we go. It's like lagging or something. What's going on? Here we go. Yeah, almost 7%. Right. You can see 83% IV implied volatility. Usually it's around 50 to maybe 60 best case average. But yeah, very it's elevated. Not crazy. It's a little bit less than usual. Honestly, usually it's a bit higher. But it's still pretty elevated. So in other words, as long as Tesla essentially moves below the expected price range or the movement that the market is currently pricing in, and especially if it's pretty flat, both sides lose. Even if Tesla goes up 2% and you bought calls, you probably still lost because now the contract is worth less because now the market's pricing in a less range of movement because now this big question mark is out of the way. And even though it technically went in your direction by 2%, you still are down on that contract because it didn't go enough. And the implied volatility crush, IV crush, now has made the contract worth a lot less because now the market is pricing in less of a movement since this question mark event, if you will, is now out of the way and now it's more predictable. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's kind of what I'm expecting. So to sum it all up, essentially I'm expecting Tesla, there's potentially to move less than the market is expecting and actually potentially still be stuck within this range, within this general range, somewhere around this range. That's my current expectation. Let's see. Who knows? Nobody knows. I have no idea if that actually happened. That's my best guess. The reason is simple because we're still very much in this pennant and there's still a lot of room in this massive, massive daily pennant that we are in to continue consolidating sideways like this for potentially a few more weeks until I think closer to middle of August when we get a true breakout in one direction or the other. Obviously I lean bullish, but worth mentioning. Anyways, that's my expectations. Let's see what happens. Tomorrow's a big day. Thanks for watching and I'll see you then. Peace.